So good evening. This is Cynthia Mace, Director of College Counseling at Wyoming High School. If you have been with us for the previous 3 sessions, this is the 4th time you'll be hearing this, so I apologize for that. But if you are just joining us, I work with last names A through L. Mrs. Button works with last names M through Z. She is behind the scenes tonight, making sure the webinar runs smoothly. So the session you are about ready to hear about is scholarships and financial aid. And joining us is Tim Wilms from Xavier University. He is a regional recruitment director. He's actually based out of St. Louis, and he has been with Xavier for 6 years. So I will turn it over to Tim to get us going.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for being here tonight. I know we have a limited amount of time, but just to expand on a little bit more about who I am. I've been with Xavier for a little while now. The time goes faster and faster, but I want to let you know I'm a proud Xavier grad from the class of 2014 and recently just got my MBA with Xavier too. So that's how committed I am to Xavier. And as mentioned as well, I work with students basically west of the Mississippi, St. Louis out to Colorado. So it's really great to be with some Cincinnati families tonight. Also wanted to let you know as we get going here on this financial aid and scholarship presentation, even though I'm based out of St. Louis, I'm on bandwagon Bengals. So I just want to make sure that's known by everybody. So we're all on the same team here. Really excited about that. Just put together a little bit of a quick presentation here for you, a little bit more about financial aid as just a way of introduction. This is one of the things that I think trips people up as far as understanding the philosophy behind the FAFSA, behind filling out that information and financial aid. What does it mean at one school versus another? And so we'll kind of talk about that. We'll also talk a little bit about scholarships, how those play in. So this is with just a quick 20-minute sort of session. This is really meant to be an overview of what the financial aid process looks like for colleges and universities, not just here in Cincinnati or in Ohio, but around the country. So we'll kind of talk about that as we go. So first, mentioning the philosophy of financial aid, kind of breaking it down at the basic level. When you ask about, well, why fill out the FAFSA? Why do colleges and universities use the FAFSA to award financial aid? How does that all come together? So the primary philosophy of financial aid for universities, for colleges, is to utilize this tool, the free application for federal student aid, to award financial aid on the most equitable level possible. So what that assumes is that parents do have a primary responsibility to invest in a dependent child's education. But also what the FAFSA is going to look at as well, or what the financial aid model is relying on, is that students do have a responsibility to contribute to their education as well. And that's different for every family. And again, this is a very high level. But actually what the FAFSA will do when you're filling out that application is they'll not only look at a parent's income, or they'll look at the parent's assets, but they'll look at the students as well. And I know that's a little far reaching, but when we're talking about scholarships and grants and loans, especially being in the student's name versus the parent's name, that's where the FAFSA is coming in and saying that there's a dual responsibility. And so it's really a great time for students and parents to kind of start coming together, talking about, well, what's realistic for us as a family, what kind of schools are we looking at, and students, where do you fit into that puzzle as well? One other thing to mention as you're filling out the FAFSA for this upcoming year, opening on October 1st, is that the FAFSA will utilize primarily your taxes and your income statements, not from the previous year, but you'll hear this term sometimes, prior year. So if you're filling out the FAFSA for the 2023-2024 school year, you would not submit your taxes from the 2022 year, but from 2021. And so what happens sometimes, and parents mention this every now and then, is that for the FAFSA they want, or the system wants to take as best a screenshot of the current state of the household as it can, but sometimes going back 2 years on the tax returns, for instance, it might not be an accurate depiction of what that current household looks like. And so just so you know that that's part of this process as well. There can be a special circumstances appeal that comes with it. So it's not a cut and dry scenario, and every household is different, but the FAFSA is, I think, the best way to have sort of that equitable look at what a family's household can contribute in the process. So again, we mentioned there's the income and the assets for both the student and the parent. These are some of the things that the FAFSA will ask for. And sometimes too, there's going to be a verification of those materials. So for anybody wondering, well, why is it 2 years before and not just the 1 year prior? What they ended up finding out was that there's sometimes a parent who maybe runs their own business or is in a different line of work where you can't, if they're asked for verification when you're filling out the FAFSA, they found that it wasn't always applicable, or a family wasn't able to properly verify their current assets, which is why they moved it back 2 years as an answer there, if anybody was curious about that. So that's all the high level stuff. One thing that we want to make sure you understand when we're talking about the FAFSA, talking about financial aid, is that you might be applying for admission to 8 universities or 10 universities, and it could be schools in Ohio and it could be schools all over the country. So the FAFSA is kind of that tool when you're applying for financial aid, where that's a tool that you're going to be applying with the FAFSA, and that FAFSA information is going to be shared with all 8 or all 10 of those schools. So when a college is looking at awarding financial aid, they're basing their financial aid off of the FAFSA. They're also basing how much they can award to a student or to a family based on their cost of attendance. So we'll go through an example of that here in one of the upcoming slides. But when we're talking about college cost of attendance, we're looking at tuition and fees for that upcoming year. So in this case, the 2022-2023 school year, you're looking at room and board for the 2022-2023 school year, as well as this box on the right, other expenses. Those other expenses could be the amount you're paying for books, the amount that you're paying for supplies or different fees like lab fees, nursing fees, etc. And then also transportation. So this is an important point because it's not money that you're paying. Well, actually, in the case of those fees, in the tuition and fee section, you would be paying those fees directly to the university. But in the bottom 3 here, books, supplies, transportation, those are things you're not paying to the university, but you need to consider as part of the total cost of attendance. So actually, I know for Xavier, what we do for our financial aid packages, and this should be pretty consistent throughout the state, throughout the country, is not only mark down, here's the tuition and fees, here's the room and board, but they'll also mark down, here's the estimated additional cost of coming to Xavier with transportation, supplies, things like that. We mark that as an additional $3,200, not to pay to the university, but to take into account when you are thinking about the cost of attendance. And that cost of attendance number, as you'll see here, is what the college or university will use as a basis for awarding financial aid. So we have these 3 different colleges as an example that you might be applying to. Option A would be, let's say, a private college. Option B would be a state university or college. And then C would be a 2-year college institution. So what you'll see here is, let's say if the cost of option A is $40,000, if you filled out the FAFSA and the FAFSA returned back to you saying you have a $10,000 EFC or an estimated family contribution, the remaining financial need based on the original cost of attendance, 40,000 minus 10,000, the remaining financial need that the student has for this particular institution is $30,000. Versus, as you'll see, for a state college, that cost of attendance in total would be, let's say, for this example, $20,000. So it's less expensive of an institution, which means that EFC of 10,000 would only merit a financial need of 10,000. And you can see, obviously, with that example on the bottom, there's no financial need because the EFC matches the level of the total cost of attendance for the college. So the two main things we want you to see here is that first, regardless, and this can be a misnomer, so it's nice to talk about, regardless of what schools you're applying to, your EFC theoretically should always be the same, right? Because you're filling out one FAFSA applying to those different institutions. And the other thing too is that just because you're applying to a school that might be a little more, expensive, let's say, or more, higher sticker price than another college, it doesn't mean that the final cost could come out closer to being the same, because there's a different level of financial need based on the institution. So already I've been talking a lot, and we already are running out of time, which is amazing. So I'll run through these slides here, try to be as succinct as possible, and then answer any questions you have. But when you're thinking about different sources of financial aid, there's four major ones we want you to consider. Thing one would be scholarships. Those scholarships are, think of that as gift money, in the sense that those are things that you do not have to repay in the process. So for instance, again, using the Xavier as an example. So for Xavier, we have a couple different ways you can earn scholarships. First would be a merit-based academic scholarship based on what you're applying, based on your application, your GPA, your test scores, that kind of thing. There's also competitive scholarships. And then there's also, we encourage students to fill out private scholarships as well, that you could find third party or, private scholarships with a local organization that could be put towards your institutional payment. Another thing would be grants. That's also gift money that you're not giving back. Those grants could be performing arts, right? Athletic. If you're coming in to be a student athlete, you could get an athletic grant. But also there are grants that are institutional and need-based. So if we get to it, there's a slide coming up that spells that out a little bit. But the institutional grant could be, like I said, if you're coming in as a music major, you might get music money or grants that you don't have to pay back that are part of your total scholarships and grants. But then it also could be something like the Pell Grant. That's a federal grant, and that is need-based, and that's coming from the federal government. Here in Ohio, if you're applying for, a school like University of Cincinnati, Xavier, Ohio State, what have you, here in the state of Ohio, there's also Ohio State grants based on your estimated family contribution. And then there's also loans, and we'll jump to that slide here and kind of start wrapping up, just so we can spell out what those loans would look like. I think a lot of people have wondered about that. So we'll talk about that. And then the fourth source of financial aid is coming through work opportunities. So there are need-based work opportunities through the, as determined by the federal government, like a federal work study program. That's based on your EFC, versus a student who might not be eligible for that work study program. That doesn't bar you from working on campus. It just means you're not part of the federal program, and you're still welcome to work on campus. So those are the four main ways we, as you'll see, I kind of tried to touch on all that stuff as quickly as I could. Those are the four main inputs, let's say, for scholarships, grants, loans, and then work study, ways that you could get some sort of financial aid. So real quickly, talking about the different loan options. This certainly is not the most popular thing to talk about, but just want to make sure it is covered. There are a couple of options for loans through the federal government. And these are the most popular loans that you can take out because there are a lower fixed rate. Those rates will be the same throughout the 4 years. And these are loans that these are loans that are in the student's name, and also that students do not have to pay back until after they graduate. So that's why these tend to be the most popular student loan options. And then at the bottom, you see that plus the parent loan. That's also the federal government option through that, based on your application through the FAFSA. So talking about that, those plus loans, oftentimes for financial aid, offices are the preferred loan for parents to take out versus a private loan where rates could shift, rates could be a little higher and not as guaranteed. And so for those plus loans, the parent loans, there are different options there where a parent, the interest might start accruing once a parent takes out the loan, but there's options where a parent can start paying after a certain number of days, or they can also push some of that payment back until after a student graduates and then do a plan that way as well. The last thing I'll mention about the loans, and sorry to end this presentation on just not a fun thing, but do want to mention there's a student, any student who applies for the FAFSA will always be eligible potentially for an unsubsidized loan. That means that the federal government is not going to pay the interest, and the interest will accrue over the 4 years, let's say, that a student's in college. But still, a student would not pay those loans back until after they graduate. Versus subsidized, if a student, that's a need-based loan. If you fit under a certain umbrella of your EFC, that subsidized loan, the federal government will pay for the interest, and the interest will not start accruing until after you graduate. And what you can see with those two loans is that after 6 months after you graduate, that's when that and that's when those payments start having to be made. So it's already about 4 minutes left. Let me just see. I think that's really the main stuff we want to talk about. A lot more about loans, private alternative loans, and we talked a little bit about the work opportunities. So here's some final tips for you. The FAFSA opens on October 1st every year, and the National Decision Day is May 1st every year. The big thing I would just recommend for you is that even though the FAFSA is kind of a universal application, a lot of different types of colleges and universities have different models for how they award financial aid and how they award scholarships. So you always want to make sure that you're working with your college representative, work with your amazing high school counseling staff here to kind of make sure you're staying on top of your scholarships and deadlines, not just for financial aid through the FAFSA, but also for institutional grant and scholarship opportunities as well. So that is the main stuff that I wanted to cover. If I ever do this again, we'll make sure we get through all the slides within 15 minutes, but that was the basic stuff.
I mean, you were given the Herculean task of covering a highly complex topic in a very short window of time, but you hit on the highlights, which is what I wanted our families to see. We will host a financial aid workshop in September every single year, where we kind of go over the things that you've talked about, but a little, we have a little more time. So this is not the first, this is only the first time students will be hearing this information, not the only time they will be hearing it. So don't stress if you feel confused. It looks like we do have one question. Nope, no questions.
Oh yeah, it was the FAFSA code for Xavier. So off the top of my head, it was 003144. So don't quote me on that. I think that's the one that's launched in my head. So hopefully that's correct.
Okay. Well, Tim, we really appreciate you joining us this evening. And if I know that if families have additional questions, they will be sure to reach out to you, or we encourage them to reach out to you.
Absolutely. And I do want to mention too, I mentioned I work with students west of the Mississippi. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you have. Also, your admission counselor for this upcoming year, as it currently stands, is Lindsay Steller, and you can find her information online as well. So between the two of us, or anybody at Xavier, if you come for a visit, we try our best to help be great representatives for Xavier, but also answer your questions about the process. So even if it's questions about the FAFSA, financial aid, the whole process, we want to be as much help as we can. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thanks, Tim. Take care. Have a good night.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.